The Rebel Capitalist Show.
If we take it a step back, or if we go back even further in the timeline, what the Marxists talk about is late-stage capitalism.
They do. I didn't see that.
Yeah, so this brings up our good friend Jeff Snider in a different way.
Right.
I'm a huge fan of his content, and one time I was listening to Jeff, and I've actually had a conversation with him about what the Chinese did when the Berlin Wall came down.
Correct.
When communism came down,
Right.
let's say in the early 90s, the Chinese actually sent in a group of economists to Russia
To study.
it, to figure out what happened there, because their economies were very similar.
Right.
And so the economists came back to China, and their conclusion was not that communism failed. It's that they just didn't do it right.
Correct.
So how did they do it wrong? Well, they didn't allow capitalism to flourish before they came over and before they came in and tried to take over the means of production.
Correct.
So most people don't realize, but you do, because you've brought up this book, which I think everyone should read to know the enemy, is the fact that Marx really wasn't anti-capitalist to a certain extent. He saw the value in the industrialists and the capitalists of their time because he knew that they were very good at building stuff. He just thought that late-stage capitalism was when they can't extract any more profits, then they'll start to feed on their workers by lowering their wages, and the workers are their customers.
Yeah.
Therefore, they're shooting themselves in the foot to where the whole society that the capitalists have built will crumble. So it's up to the communists or the socialists maybe to take over the means of production
Right.
by any
Correct.
means necessary.
Correct.
Or else the capitalists will implode the whole system that they built.
Correct.
Right.
So what he recognized was the flaws, again, in 1848, the flaws in capitalism. So stage one would be socialism, which we had in 1933. You know, FDR puts us on Social Security, we got welfare, Obamacare, and now we have so many Americans without that government stimmy check. We're finished.
Yeah.
Then they said stage two would kick in. So in 2020, I'm not Republican or Democrat, not endorsing Trump, who's a friend of mine, or Biden. I'm saying communists took over in 2020. And when we were on that call with you and Jeff, you were talking about the eurodollar system and all this stuff, and the fractional reserve system and bank reserve currency, which is macro. That's where the heist took place. And so what's happening today, I just got it on this here, the European Union is starting to collapse because, as you said, it's not the depression, it's the stop of economic activity.
That's right.
How do you say that? What's happening there?
Yeah, so when some of us macro geeks get together,
nobody else can understand, which is the problem.
We use the term deflation and inflation very loosely.
Correct, interchangeably and stuff like that.
Yeah, based on the context. Right. And when I talked to Snider, and we just talked about this recent phenomenon with the eurodollar future curve inverting, and he talked about that creating an environment that's deflationary. Well, most people see that as prices going down. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But what that really means is we have a reduction in global economic activity. So this euro-dollar market is saying, hey, guys, wake up.
Yeah.
These draconian measures
are working.
Not only are they not well, they're working if you want to reduce economic activity, but they will most likely see them into the future, and this is going to crush the global economy, and it's going to make the global economy go into a recession, which makes everyone go into the arms of that person, that dictator that's riding in on the white horse, who is a central planner, who is a Marxist that says, I can solve all of your problems.
They're losing control, so rioting's blowing up in Europe, like Austria, the big place. Turkey's in serious trouble. And so the world economy is coming apart, and if that crashes the stock market, that's the pensions.
Yeah, right.
My generation of boomers was 1974 when I came back from Vietnam. I find my poor dad broke, even with a PhD. Exactly as Marx predicted, the intellectuals would go.
Yeah.
So then in 74, ERISA comes out, which is the 401k. And today, as we speak, in 2021, December, 10,000 boomers are retiring every day. And they're dependent upon the stock market. And if the euro-dollar system comes down, what do you think is going to happen to the U.S. stock market?
Yeah, and let's also think this through, because today is December 15th, I think, and the Fed just came out with an announcement where they're taking the taper or their quantitative easing from 105 billion down to 75, and this is kind of on the path to raising interest rates, but it puts the central planners in a very precarious position. Because right now, as most of your viewers know, we've got prices going up significantly in the United States. The CPI says it's 6.8%, but we know it's a lot higher than that. So we've got all this consumer price inflation. Okay, well, if the Fed comes out and increases interest rates, and if that does crash the stock market, that crashes people's 401k,
Correct.
then everyone's going to say, well, Fed save us. Fed save us. Where's the Fed put? Well, then if they come back and say, okay, well, we'll reduce interest rates back down to zero, we'll do quantitative easing again, but well, wait a minute, time out, because remember, we've got inflation at 6.8%. So if they do that, then inflation most likely goes to 7 to 8 to 9, and that's as measured by the government. So they're in this we all are in this crazy position where either you lose a tremendous amount of purchasing power by the 401ks crashing, or you lose a tremendous amount of purchasing power by the prices of the stuff that the average American buys daily going up by 10, 15, maybe even 20% per year.
Correct. And that happened in 72 also when Nixon moved jobs into China. Do you know what I mean? I was of that generation watching all this stuff happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other thing that this book says here is, as you know, inflation makes the poor poor. It doesn't hurt us.
No. It's
if inflation is in asset prices, like the stock market, real estate, we make fortunes. But the working guy out there working for $50 an hour or whatever they work for today, he just took a haircut. Then he can't afford to live.
That's right.
And then you have the southern border right on our border right here, wide open. People are coming in droves. They have smash and grabs. This is all stage 2 communism. And they defund the police. They're going to try and take our weapons away. This guy Kyle Rittenhouse, was an issue of gun control. Supposedly, the press reports that he shoots black people. He shot white people.
Yeah, right.
It is so screwed up, I can't believe it.
And what was one of Stalin's main tactics? It was to create divisiveness.
Yes.
You pin people up against each other, and then they ignore who's really pulling the strings.
Correct.
And then you can basically do whatever you want. Remember our good friend Chris Martinson?
Yes.
When he did that presentation
at your event,
our event here a couple weeks ago. Yeah, but remember he talked about that experiment with the rats in the cage. Yeah. So basically, if you've got one rat in a cage and you've got the scientist out there that's shocking the rat, if it's in a cage by itself, it'll just kind of huddle up into a ball and it won't really do anything. But if you put two rats in the same cage and if you shock them, then they'll think it's one another and they will start to fight, and they'll actually fight to the death, because they don't know that it's that guy out there in the white lab coat. And so it's kind of this I forgot what the exact experiment was called, but we can see that playing out right now in the United States, where the media and the central planners and the social media especially is trying to make us even more and more divisive. And then we, the average Joe, look around and we aren't sophisticated enough or have the education to understand all of these things at play, like that's going to be in your book here. And so we look at everyone else out there and we say, oh, it must be that person that's wearing a mask, or, oh, it must be that person that's not wearing a mask. And then we start to really fight, or it must be this Rittenhouse character, or it must be the people
Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, or whomever you don't like, right? Whatever side of the aisle you're on.
Right.
And then it just leads to more and more and more fighting. And then when you combine that with the three things that have historically made people go get the pitchforks and the torches, and I'm talking about food prices going up, energy prices going up, and shelter going up, that creates this powder keg that can only lead to more and more social unrest.
Amen.
Yeah.
And he wrote this in 1848, and it's written in here.
Yeah.
And he talks about so many things like technology, like Jeff Booth talks about the price of tomorrow.
Yeah.
there's going to be fewer jobs.
Yeah, it's just what's bizarre about his conclusions is that he blames all of this on capitalism.
Yes.
When really, if you study it, it's the result of more and more central planning.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the Fed is central planning.
Oh, it's
The third Federal
yes,
Reserve Bank.
that's the quintessential. It's the definition
And
because they're central planning money.
And the other thing that Lenin says, the way you crush the the bourgeoisie and all this is taxes. So America was really formed in 1773. It was called the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
And now all they want to do is, like, I couldn't believe Biden saying, we're going to raise another $10 trillion, but it won't cost us anything.
Yeah.
How stupid do you have to be?
Yeah.
How stupid do you have to be where you get this guy Biden stands up there and he says, we're going to spend another $10 trillion. I'll tell you how much a trillion is. If you spent $1 a minute, it would take you 32,000 years to spend $1 trillion.
Yeah. Yeah.
It takes them a minute to print $1 trillion.
Yeah. It's just
Well, we're not going to raise any taxes.
Yeah, of course not.